Despite the fact that Coraline came out a whopping 14 years ago, I only got around to watching it in January of this year. Even though it was a horror movie for kids, it was better than I expected. Caroline
Still Coraline.
was a great protagonist, the stop motion looked amazing, and had some genuinely unnerving scenes. But as you can imagine if you've seen any of my previous videos, it was the powers of the main antagonist, the Beldam, that really piqued my interest. She's an otherworldly arachnoid being who preys on children using her powers and has a background shrouded in mystery. So it was right up my alley. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to point out that I'll be taking feats from both the movie and the book. It mostly flows the same with the same story beats, but it does have some differences. The biggest one, at least visually for me, is the movie's depiction of the Beldam's true form, making her out to be some kind of creature made out of threading needles, while the book makes her out to be just a large creepy lady with spider-like similarities. Neither outright contradicts the other, and it's safe to assume that the movie's Beldam is capable of what the books can do, and vice versa. Getting physicals out of the way immediately, the Beldam has no notable feats in this regard. No impressive movement or reaction speed, no scene of her tanking a huge blow from an attacker, and nothing that proves her to be physically powerful. If anything, this section should be full of anti-feats, like her failing to react to Coraline throwing a cat at her face, who tore out her button eyes, or just slashed her face up real good, depending on which iteration we're talking about. And she's relative to Coraline, an 11-year-old girl in strength, struggling to overpower her when they fought over the door. She would have eventually won, but Coraline ended up slamming the door and severing her hand with the help of 3 ghost children and also with the help of both of her parents in the book. The word Beldam means malicious and ugly old woman or a witch, and most likely has the physical capabilities of one. But of course, it's not her strength that makes her so dangerous. Whether it's the eyes of the doll that she creates for certain children, or she just knows, the Beldam has the foresight to know who will be coming to her and when. When Coraline first walks through the door, she sees that it's already an exact replica of her home, and when she meets everyone, they're all people she's already familiar with in the real world. Except the Beldam herself, who in the book does look similar to Coraline's mom, but described to be taller, thinner, and paler, with sharp nails and longer teeth. But even she's an identical doppelganger in the movie. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that everyone has button eyes, but it's such a small detail, I wouldn't blame you for missing it on your first watch. She uses this pocket dimension to warp reality to her own choosing, manipulating children by making an ideal world in which they'll never want to leave. She introduces herself as their other mother who loves and cares for them and gives them everything that they want. She gives them a taste of the world, and once they're hooked, she tells them that all they need to do to stay here forever is let her sew buttons on their eyes. I couldn't imagine anyone, let alone a small child, going through the agonizing pain of having a sewing needle and thread stabbed through both of their eyeballs, but I guess it's worked before. Speaking of which, we meet 3 dead children from the past who took the Beldam up on her offer. Although it's not outright stated, we can assume that they're from very different time periods. It isn't confirmed if these are her only victims, but it's safe to say that she's been snatching kids up for centuries. Once they accept her offer, she eats up their lives, taking everything that made them, them. They no longer remember their names or where they came from, only faint memories of the past and their real mothers. I'm not sure if she physically consumes the children or does a Shang Tsung type of soul steal, but she does feed off of it and it does kill the kids. Think of her as a reverse Pennywise. While he marinates his targets using their fears, she uses love to reel them in. Same end goal though.
But she locked us here and ate up our lives.
Motivations aside, we can get onto how she uses her powers and abilities. As I already stated, she can warp this reality to her own choosing. As we see later on in the story, this world is more of a blank canvas. Completely white and featureless, the Beldam uses her powers to accommodate for her target's liking. She creates food Coraline would love, fun spectacles like a theater show and a tiny circus. She's even able to conjure up sentient beings. From lowly bug furniture, living plants, and talking toys, to complex humans with their own thoughts and emotions. Although it's mostly to her benefit, like Bobinsky and Mrs. Forcible and Spink, it can also be to her detriment, like how Coraline's other father talked too much and had to be silenced, or how the other YB felt bad for Coraline and tried helping her. In the end, they were still the Beldam's creations, and she handled them accordingly. She straight up killed the other YB off-screen, and forced the other father to attack Coraline. He does fight back the mental struggle in the movie though, even handing Coraline the eye of one of the dead kids which he needed to escape. That sounds so weird out of context. She can cast illusions and mirrors, like how she shows Coraline that her parents were just on vacation and that they were much happier without her, and as we know, they were kidnapped and trapped inside a snow globe. The book also points out that she doesn't show up in mirrors like she's some kind of vampire or something. I do wonder how the Beldam got a hold of them, and how they had no recollection of the event after they were freed. She did have possession of the key, so she could have just teleported them to her realm like how she did to Coraline in the movie, or she just dragged them through the tunnel and wiped their memories after. It's never shown to us, so it's up in the air, but other than teleporting beings to and from her world, she herself can also move freely. We don't see her outright Enderman away, but we do get 2 scenes where she just disappears or reappears somewhere new. One scene shows Coraline gets startled when it happens, so teleportation, sure, whatever, I guess. She also has some form of omnipotence. After Coraline gets the first of the children's hearts in the book, the Beldam spawns an invisible sandstorm indoors to mess with her. And after getting the second and third, she's obviously aware and upset that Coraline made it that far despite never being around to see her progress. Earlier I mentioned her future sight, but it's likely just in regards to the children she's bound to come across rather than true visions of the future, or else she would have seen and prevented her eventual defeat. I do want to point out that the Beldam didn't make this world. Coraline and the cat do have a conversation about whether she made it or just found it, and we don't get a certain answer right then and there, or even at all in the movie, but the book gives slight confirmation of the existence of another being. This is from the scene right after Coraline slams a door on the Beldam's hand and is running through the corridor between the 2 worlds. She caught herself before she went down, using her own momentum to keep moving. She knew that if she fell in the corridor, she might never get up again. Whatever that corridor was older by far than the other mother. It was deep and slow, and it knew that she was there. The only indication of this in the movie is the visual change from the bright and colorful corridor in the beginning to the old decrepit look from this final scene. So, I'm leaning towards her finding it and can warp it to her liking using her witchy powers, once again going back to the definition of the word Beldam. There is a slight limitation to the Beldam's power, however. It's stated that the Beldam can only create what already exists in the real world. So, she can make tasty food, living people, and real houses. But I'm not sure how much of a limitation this really is, since she can create a mecha praying mantis, plants that most definitely don't exist, and bat dog hybrids. Even things that are real don't necessarily have to follow natural laws, like a mini circus that's bigger on the inside or talking dogs. She can make parodies of pre-existing beings, basically going back to giving her full reign to make whatever she wants. Like when she created a gross twisted combination of Miss Spink and Forcible, or a bulbous version of the other father to kill Coraline. What was once her father had been turned into a large, monstrous, mouthless creature, which, once again, doesn't exist in the real world. I also want to point out that the book's encounter with the other father was much scarier than the movies. I highly recommend reading the book if you haven't already. But even then, like, bears, guns, and nukes exist, so it's not like she doesn't have options. She also has a love for games. By challenging her to a game, Coraline was able to save the souls of the dead children and get her parents. But she isn't tied to her own rules. Although she swears on her right hand and on her mother's grave, the children and cat both constantly warn Coraline that even if she were to win the game, the Beldam wouldn't honor it and would still keep her there forever. So, she only prefers the kids to love her, but can kill them at any point she chooses. Simply playing the game instead of killing her outright gave Coraline the time to think of a way to win while saving the past kids. Each time a soul was saved, the world became less of itself. The movie showed it begin to crumble, while the book described the world as becoming less focused. Going from identical, to more of a photograph, to a crude charcoal drawing. She may need each soul to keep her hold on this world, becoming less and less powerful as each child was saved. As Coraline escapes, she screams telling her that she'll die without her. We don't see her die, and her hand was still up and running afterwards, so it could have just been a last-ditch effort to manipulate Coraline into staying. She was tricked into opening the door between worlds, giving Coraline an opening to attack her and get out. Her own need to gloat was her downfall, so anyone as quick-witted as Coraline could figure out a similar way of defeating her, or honestly a physical powerhouse could just beat her up. All in all, the Beldam made for the perfect villain with many abilities at her disposal. It's been a long time since its creation, but I'd love to see some kind of sequel or a retelling of the story someday. Thanks for watching today's video. Thank you to Karasu Ro for making today's thumbnail. I'm sorry if I pronounced that name wrong, but go check their Twitter out in the description. I had this one in mind for a while, so here it is, and I'm not sure what the next video will be about, but I'm currently watching the entire Saw franchise, but that one's a little heftier, so it might be out in the upcoming weeks. Anyways, Twitch is in the description, but I'll probably stream here on YouTube more often, but Twitter's down there too. Subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you guys later.
Hungry.
Queen is